1, it says, "Nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation, when at the first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea, beyond Jordan and Galilee of the nations. The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shine." Now that verse may be ringing a little familiar to you, because it's quoted in the New Testament. Actually, verse 1 is as well. But in verse 3 it says, "Thou hast multiplied the nation and not increased the joy. They joy before thee according to the joy in harvest, and as men rejoice when they divide the spoil. For thou hast broken the yoke of his burden, and the staff of his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, as in the day of Midian. For every battle of the warrior is with confused noise and garments rolled in blood, but this shall be with burning and fuel of fire. For unto us a child is born, and unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. And his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace shall there be no end, upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this." Now, obviously these two verses here, especially verse number 6, is a verse that we would call a seasonal verse, a Christmas verse, where it's quoted a lot during this time of year, along with another iconic verse in Isaiah. If you'll turn back to chapter 7 and verse number 14, it says, "Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." All right, that verse and this verse in Isaiah 9:6, "For unto us a child is born," it's like these prophetic New Testament verses that are Old Testament verses that describe the coming of the Messiah are like just tucked away in a chapter that has nothing to do with the New Testament per se, or the gospel, or Christ, or anything like that. I mean, we're talking about Naphtali and Zebulun here. And if you go back to chapter 7, I forgot exactly this. He's talking to King Ahaz. He told Ahaz, "Ask me a sign. Ask me anything you want." And Ahaz refused, because he was an ungodly man anyway. And God said, "Well, I'll give you a sign anyway." And so he quotes this verse. But as we look at this New Testament prophecy here in Isaiah 9, we kind of keep that in mind, but realize that this chapter is teaching and prophesying concerning turmoil in Israel. In fact, in verse number 1, it talks about let's look at verse number 1 again. "The dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation, when at the first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea, beyond Jordan and Galilee of the nations." Now in the New Testament it says in Galilee of the Gentiles. We'll read that in a moment. Go back to Genesis 49, and I want you to notice something concerning Zebulun and Naphtali, because these are two, what I would call maybe lesser known tribes of Israel. We don't read a lot about these tribes. In fact, in Genesis 49, when Jacob had gathered his sons together to bless them, there's not a lot even said to them about their future or their blessing. Genesis 49, verse 13, "Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea, and he shall be for an haven of ships, and his borders shall be unto Zidon." Okay, that's kind of simple. Notice in verse number 21, "Naphtali is a hind let loose, he giveth goodly words." That's all that's said. Zebulun and Naphtali. Two seemingly insignificant Israelite tribes are mentioned here in our text in Isaiah 9 in verse 1 and 2, but they're also quoted in Matthew 4. So let's go back to the New Testament and look where this arrives on the scene. In Matthew 4, verse 12 through 17, Jesus is beginning his ministry here after the temptation in the wilderness. And in Matthew 4:12, it says, "Now when Jesus had heard that John was cast into prison, he departed into Galilee, and leaving Nazareth." Now notice what our subject is. Remember we talked about Galilee, Nazareth. Well, we see right off when we look at the beginning of Christ's ministry, he departed Galilee, and leaving Nazareth, he came and dwelt in Capernaum, which is upon the seacoast in the borders of what? Zebulun and Naphtali. Well, Naphtali in the Old Testament. That it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, chapter 9. The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali by the way of the sea beyond Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people which sat in darkness saw a great light. And to them which sat in the region and shadow of death, light has sprung up. So as I was reading in Isaiah 9 this week and thinking about this passage, began to be inquisical about why. Why did God include Zebulun and Naphtali, I don't know how you really say that, in the prophecy of Christ? So we want to dig into that. You know, this is the season where we think about the birth of Christ and also his ministry from early on. We know that Jesus was born in the city of David, Bethlehem. And his lineage being a descendant of David, he obviously is of the tribe of Judah. So Clay had a map up there. Can we put that back up? He had a map up there of the Israelite nations in the Old Testament. We'll look at that in a moment. So, yeah, so if you notice here, Judah is on the southern portion of the different tribes. Here's Bethlehem and Jerusalem right together. And you got Zebulun and Naphtali right up here by the Sea of Galilee, okay? So this is the area that Christ was raised in, but he was born in Bethlehem.